Okay, so we're having a Oyster Shucking 101 demonstration here today at the Oyster Bar at the Old Ebbitt Grill. We're going to be shucking today Model T oysters from Duxbury, Massachusetts. They're a boutique oyster grower, and there's a salty, briny oyster. They're what they call a Virginica oyster, which is the East Coast variety that most people around here are used to, what you normally see. And so what I'm going to do is, so this oyster, you face it with the cup side down, and then if you divide the oyster into a quadrant, the lower corner of the top right-hand quadrant is where the abductor muscle is. And you're going to see why that's important. But keep that in mind. Think visually your oyster into a quadrant. The lower corner of the top right-hand quadrant, that's where the abductor muscle is. So we're going to go in through, this is called the bill, this is the hinge part. We're going to go in through the hinge part of the oyster, and you'll see there's a natural place to put your oyster knife. Oyster knife, if you don't have one, don't shuck oysters, hit it with a hammer, but do not try and shuck an oyster with a paring knife or a kitchen knife. That's a dangerous thing to do. Do not do that. If you don't have an oyster knife, you can go on Amazon anywhere. You can probably pick one up for 10 bucks. So we're going to go in through, like I said, through the hinge. We're going to stick it in, and always be very mindful where your left hand is, or if you're righty, if you're lefty, where your right hand is, because what you don't want to do, you're going to put a lot of pressure on this oyster, and you don't want to miss and shuck your hand. Anyway, we're going to go in through the hinge. We're going to stick the oyster knife in there, and we're going to rock the oyster knife back and forth until we pop the oyster open, like I just saw. Now you're going to see why that topper quadrant is, because we're going to go in, we want to release the top shell from the abductor muscle, which is where I explained it was before, in the upper right hand quadrant. And the reason that's important, you want to know where that is, because you don't want to go in there and fish around and then chop up the meat of this beautiful oyster before someone gets to eat it. So you'll see that is a very nicely shucked, perfectly shucked oyster right there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go in, we're going to release the abductor muscle from the bottom shell. We're going to go in, and with a very, like a one thing, and now that oyster is ready to be slurped. And I suggest eating an oyster out of the shell and not using one of these to scoop the oyster out of the shell, because you're missing one of the great parts about the oyster is the oyster liquor or liqueur. And I like to eat them plain, or I like just a little squeeze of lemon. I really don't like cocktail sauce, putting ketchup on these oysters, because there's a complex flavor with oysters. They're sweet and briny and salty, and I don't like to mask it with that cocktail sauce. But if that's the way you like it, have at it. Delicious.